Hey, it's been a while, but I'm now back for some more 5-minute fiddle. Yes. So last week I did like a podcast, an interview, just a load of talking basically, with another jazz violinist, Matt Holborn, and on his podcast called the Jazz Violin Podcast. Quite a suitable title, I think. And there's been loads of interviews and podcasts on there, and I was number 41, I think. So on this 5-minute fiddle, I thought I'd look at a few of the points that I said and look at them just a little bit deeper to explain a little bit more about what I meant. A lot of the points that I said on the podcast I have actually covered on previous 5-minute fiddles, so it's definitely worth looking back at a few of them. But for now, I'll try and add a little bit more info to each of the points. So firstly, I was talking about playing and practicing classical music and using some of the excerpts from some pieces, some classical pieces, as good exercises as well as beautiful tunes. I mentioned the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, so just a couple of ideas from there which I personally use as good warm-ups. There's some real nice couple of scale type runs up. Again, looking at the third movement, it's my favourite of the movements. And there's one at the end as well that goes a bit higher. But essentially, I'm always looking for those little passages that are great for practicing, running, getting your fingers moving, getting them stretching almost, you know. The whole concerto starts beautifully with these stretches. And so on. And it gets those fingers stretching, some of them get it moving. And that's what I like to do when I'm playing them. You know, I'm not the best classical violin player in the world, but I do like to use some of these ideas for my own devices and my own uses. I think it's fantastic to use those classical style pieces as great exercises as well to get you warmed up, ready. Certainly I feel it warms me up. I mentioned playing notes in different ways with different techniques, trying to make the notes sound fit the piece and the specific style of the piece in a better way. So instead, I think my example was the flat and third in B flat. So we're in B flat, so if I was going to go, it doesn't sound too jazzy. So instead, it's what you do with that note that makes it sound jazzy, I think. It's like a bend. It's like a bit of a bend and the bows adding and taking pressure. Tiny little slide going into it. Not much of a slide, but a little bit. It's tiny, tiny little movements that create that shrill. Mention the breathiness of the bow. I have talked about this before, that kind of breathy sax thing. It's just that they're giving it that light, almost airy, whispery. That breathiness works nicely when you're in the higher positions, like third position, because it's as well as the bow being light on the string, it's the fingers that play the notes are light as well. I just think it's a nice way of playing. I mentioned that I started with the very early jazz, and that's what I love. The earlier jazz is some of my favourite. I do like to look at all jazz, I like to play all jazz. My favourite, like I say, is the earlier style. But I do think it's very important to look at that earlier style to get that grounding. One of the things I found very interesting to talk about was digging deep into my own thoughts on getting things right on stage and playing the things that you might have practiced that have gone well in the practice and they might not go so well on stage. And I've never really thought about it before. And as I was thinking, I realised, well, sometimes I'll just go for it and it might not go right the first, second, third time you try it. but eventually it will come to you. And you might find a better way maybe of doing it and fitting it into certain songs. So I mentioned, I was looking at whipping up the A7 arpeggio. So something I've been looking at is using the whole violin. And then maybe back down the D minor. You can go right to the top. It doesn't have to be an A7. It can just be a lovely A arpeggio. And I might practice it and it'll go nicely in practice. And, you think, okay, yeah, I'll stick that in. It could go before a D minor, like I say. And then you get to stage. It's a different kettle of fish on stage, isn't it? It's a different pressure. The only way I find that works for me is just to bite the bullet and go for it. And sometimes it might sound a bit off. It doesn't go as well as I might have played it in my practice, but maybe it's not hugely noticeable to people listening, hopefully. But the more I find I do it and get it wrong a few times, get a few notes wrong, eventually I'll hit the sweet spot and then it becomes part of my playing naturally. And that's how I find it works best for me. So hopefully that explains what I meant by sometimes you got to get things wrong to get them right. And that's what I mean. So hopefully that looks a little bit deeper into a few of the things I said in the podcast. If you haven't listened to the podcast yet, do check it out. It's Jazz Violin Podcast, Spotify, all of the things. And there are plenty of violinists that have been interviewed in a similar fashion to listen to as well. I was number 41, so there's another 40. So it's definitely worth checking out if you like a bit of jazz violin. And I will be back in the future with some more tips, hints and tricks for jazz violin. We'll see you some point in the future. Yes!